You were kidnapped as a child, something that you hope will never happen again. But then you grow up and you get married, and your own 2 children are abducted. The worst part of that is they are abducted by your spouse, who has residency in a different country. What do you do to get that child back? And what becomes of that story? You turn it into a fabulous book that becomes a lifetime movie. Join me as I talk with author Lizbeth Meredith on this episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.
Welcome to True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People, the podcast where we bring 2 passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction, and reminding you that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. Here is your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. One link to a link tree will get you every place you need to go pertaining to the show. All right. Once again, I know you guys are getting tired of hearing me say this, but this is how my season is going. I have a person here that fits both bills of my show as far as being an author and extraordinary person. Let me tell you who we have here today. She writes, speaks, and coaches on taming trauma and increasing resilience. Her indie memoir became the Lifetime TV movie Stolen by Their Father, and today she helps survivors of unspeakable deeds unpack their stories through interviews that are woven into documentaries on a popular true crime channel. She loves to laugh and finds humor and grace in the darkness, and she celebrates well-told stories of persistence. She was a kidnapped child whose own children were kidnapped and taken out of country. And intergenerational trauma, the lifelong pursuit of healing, and the fact that time does not heal all wounds are some of the topics she speaks on. Reinventing ourselves after midlife, solo travel, and navigating mental health are also areas of expertise. She is the author of Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters, and the subject of the Lifetime movie Stolen by Their Father. Please welcome Lizbeth Meredith. Lizbeth, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
I am so excited to be here. I love your show, and thanks for asking me to. And I know we both love true crime.
Yes, we do. We do. And I think we both do it for exactly the right reasons. So honored to have you here.
Thank you.
Speaking of that, I do know that you are a podcast host as well. Persistence You. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. You know, when I was going through my darkest seasons with kidnapped children, I relied so heavily on building community, friends, new friends. I didn't have family a lot in my corner, and I was really isolated at having come out of an abusive relationship at one point. And so my podcast is all about creating community and reminding people that a lot of us don't have innate talent. We don't necessarily all have privilege or funds or all of that. But if we can persist and stay in community and cheer one another on, it's incredible what we can accomplish.
So, Stolen by Their Father is a story of you kiss your little girl goodbye one day and her father kidnaps her, takes her over to Greece. I have to ask this because a lot of us, I think I told you this off of air, especially me, we hear about these cases.
Right.
Not without my daughter, Betty Mahmoudi story is such a case, but it was dealing with Muslim countries where women are often not respected. It happens in Greece. Does it happen in many other countries you don't know about as well?
Oh, many, many countries. And both, by the way, I have 2 daughters that were kidnapped. Yes, many countries, including people come and take their children to our country when their children belong in another country and take them into hiding here as well. So it does. It happens in all countries. I would say probably not North Korea as easily, but outside of that, wherever people have the freedom of movement, it does happen because a lot of times people have conflict in their relationships, whether they were married or not. And, sometimes it is driven by domestic abuse, as it was in my case, but other times not. And it is very difficult to find your children if you have a a partner that takes your child from Alaska, let's say, to California. You're dealing with two different states and two different state governments and different understandings, interpretations of custodial laws. So imagine foreign countries and foreign languages and different beliefs and cultures. It can be real tricky.
So is it kind of one of those things where, since we're on American soil, as you know, we have a certain different laws than what Greece or somebody else might have. So is it the fact that since he was from Greece originally, that he's a Greece native, once he got across that border to Greece, now the Greece laws applies to him being a citizen and no longer to you?
Well, sort of. In our case, it was a little different. He was an American citizen and a Greek citizen when I met him. But when he did take the children illegally to his country of Greece, his home country of Greece, it made it all the more difficult for the reasons I mentioned before. But Greece belonged to what they call the Hague Convention. And that's really a huge agreement between many, many different countries where this particular aspect of the Hague Convention, there is an agreement that, hey, if someone takes children from their place of habitual residence and magically shows up here, we're going to say, look, you can't just be here with your kids without a custody order in place that gives you permission. You've got to go back home and file appropriate documentation in the place of habitual residence. And so it seemed like a slam dunk, like, great, they signed on to this. They were a signatory to this treaty, easy peasy. All I need to do is file the documentation and my kids should be coming back. And that's just not what happened at all.
So tell us a little bit about your situation. I know you said that you were in a domestic abusive relationship with a father. How do we get to this point to where your daughters are now over in Greece and you're doing what you can to get them back?
That's a good question. I remember thinking the same thing. How did I get here? I had met him, my former husband, as a fairly young person. He's a little bit older than myself. And we met at our place of residence where we both worked in Alaska. What I realize looking back now is that the fact that he felt so familiar to me, that it felt like home, coming from the horrific situation that I was living in, should have been a red flag. But I think often when you're a young person, you don't make those thoughts. You don't say to yourself, maybe I should be concerned that this feels so familiar when I didn't like where it came from. I was a young person who said to myself, I'm going to do better than my parents did. They had a lot of chaos in their lives, divorce, domestic abuse, remarriages, all the things. And I remember being young and hard-headed and thinking, I'm going to do better just because I said so. And so I don't do anything that would have helped me do better. I just make that internal commitment. My kids won't come from divorce, not domestic abuse. They'll never have to look one parent up. They'll grow up with a functional family home. And I reach out and grab the first hand that reaches for mine. It didn't take too long before I realized I was in a huge mess. My former husband tried to control everything, from the way that I looked was unacceptable, to the way that I spoke, to the fact that he didn't feel I was smart, to the fact that I came from a very weak family. He said, and no one would be there for me no matter what. If he left, no one else would step forward and claim me. And to some extent, he was right. And so I just found myself jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. When I finally left was after the relationship became violent. I had two tiny little girls and was still very young in my 20s. And I said to myself, they cannot grow up like this. I didn't say to myself, I deserve better, or no one deserves to be harmed, which is of course the truth. But I said to myself, these girls deserve better, and they're not going to grow up watching this. And so I packed my bags and got, eventually, not right away, but eventually had to stay at a domestic abuse shelter. I did rebuild my life without going back, and that isn't always the case. But I didn't remarry. I didn't do the things that often are a change of circumstance. I really did some hard work to figure out how I got to that mess. And one thing that helped was I got a great job at the domestic abuse shelter when I finished college. And I worked not in the shelter, but doing community education. So 4 years after I left my former husband, I was 2 years on into the job. I graduated college. We were off welfare, of public assistance, out of Section 8 housing. And the more confident I became, the scarier he became. And so eventually he took the girls and disappeared when he had a visitation, when he had a court appointed visitation. And that was the end of that. 4 years after I left him, almost to the day.
Wow. So it sounds like typical narcissistic behavior, even though you say that some of the things he was saying is true, but he's using those against you to make you feel even weaker so that you don't want to leave.
Right.
So now you decide to leave to go. What trick or what did he say to you to make you give him the girls? What did he say? And then he took off.
Oh. He did not say or do anything. There wasn't a one-time warning like, hey, I'm going to take the girls this weekend and you'll never see them. Now, he had threatened that when we were married. So 4 years before, when we were married, he would say things like, outside of death threats, things like, if I can't have you, no one else will. But also, I could take the kids and disappear. You'll never see them again. But at this point, we'd been apart 4 years. And the court, of course, and I understand this completely, kids need all their parents. They need their parents. And so the court had granted unrestricted access. They on and off restricted it due to volatile behaviors, but they granted that. And I had felt there was something different. And I could definitely feel like we were building up to something. So then the kids left with him for a couple of days and away, I couldn't get them back.
Did you have any kind of rebuttal when the judge wanted to give unrestricted access? Was there anything that you told the judge or the court that you maybe felt that you were in danger of if he did that?
Oh, sure. I mean, the abduction, which we had already planned for in the divorce, that's interesting. But my former husband had thought it would be a great idea because he was sure I was going to lose custody since he had money and wouldn't support, give child support. So he made sure we got a guardian ad litem so that they could vote with his attorney that he get custody. Unfortunately, he showed himself too clearly to the guardian ad litem, and she advised against him getting custody, and then also wrote very specific things in our custody agreement so that he couldn't leave state legally with the kids. And so we'd said all of these things, and the court had gone with supervised visitation at times, but that's not a sustainable lifetime event. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of communities today, like the one I lived in, that didn't have a place that you could pay. And again, pay being a word that's hard on parents that are separated or divorced. But there weren't places that would supervise visitation. And so who does that leave? And for how long? So the court had granted supervised visitation based on his dangerous and stalking behaviors, but that has to be a finite period of time. It was unrestricted then, and then that was the end.
Wow. Do you ever feel like that he used the children for pawns? Like maybe he really didn't want them, but he took them because he knew it would hurt you in the process?
Absolutely. And the reason I know this outside of just knowing him was when I finally found my children after more than 2 years. They had rarely attended school, but the relatives and my daughters would say, he showed up with the kids unexpected to Greece. His family didn't know he was coming, and then left the country soon after with my kids not in tow. He went to do some other things and left them behind. They didn't speak Greek. They didn't know this new culture. They didn't know these relatives. So it was all about punishing me. And it worked. I mean, frankly, I think that might be worse than death, is to have your children tortured in your place. And it was hard on them. It was very hard on them.
I bet. I mean, I've never been through anything like that. I am divorced. I have my own struggles with the system because in Minnesota, where my oldest daughter was born, I had her at 19. And that state is very much what they call a woman and children state. As far as the state is concerned, we as men are only sperm donors. And being that I'm black and that she was white, I faced a lot of racism that, oh, well, you black anyway, so you're not going to even be around. I had a judge actually tell me that. And so I often sit back and I look at the system like it's so messed up because we give the wrong people access to the children and you fail to see through that until it becomes way too late. So I guess one of the most important questions is, how are the girls today?
I think they're amazing young women. They are in their mid-30s. They're fabulous and they struggle. And so for one, it really hit her hard with mental health. And it wasn't the kind of thing like, oh, she experiences some PTSD and anxiety and depression. No, it was debilitating. And that didn't show up for several years until after she came home. She'd gotten therapy, done a whole lot of great things. She's an amazing, smart individual. My youngest daughter has pretty serious physical health conditions that are autoimmune in nature. And as one of her doctors pointed out, have everything to do with trauma. So it's not like one and done, they're great, happily ever after, but they're amazing people and they pursue healing regularly. I mean, there's nobody who doesn't in our family to try to break even and, be a normal, productive member of society as much as we're able. So, it wasn't exactly something that went away and didn't. I like to tell people time does not heal all wounds. It really does not. And without interventions and the ability to unpack trauma, we really can't hold on to it for a lifetime. And it's like a stone that gets heavier over time.
Is either one of them mothers at this point?
No, they have both opted not to be moms or at this point, to marry. One is in a long-term relationship of more than a decade. And, for the above mentioned reasons about the girls, they chosen not to do that. That is a sad, but wonderful. It's both. It's sad for me because I would have loved to have been a grandmother, but it's awesome because they got to make choices and not, if they didn't feel up to being a mom, then that's something to celebrate. And I do celebrate it. And I have grandcats. So there you are. I have grandpets. We FaceTime.
Well, I mean, if they ever hear this, I'll say this to them, especially to the one that's in the long-term relationship. I've never been through anything like this, but I have been married. I'm on my 5th marriage, the one that survived. And the reason I share that with people is because, you just jumped in and out of marriage. Abuse has a way of doing these things to you. And being that I saw my mom get the abuse that she received, from chained to beds and physically raped and the whole nine, in a male's mindset at that point, we think we want to be able to do and to show mom that a real marriage can work. That led me to a marriage that I got abused in, hit over the head with pans and the whole nine. And like your daughter, because of this trauma, I was like, I'm never getting married again. Well, I wanted to prove that marriage works. So 3 more times and they all failed. When you know that right person, regardless of the ups and downs you go through, And if you've been in that long-term relationship and that person wants to marry you, they're taking you for everything that you are, all the trauma you've been through. If you've been with them this long, he obviously understands, right, what you've been through and where not to go. So I just think at some point, even though we are very fearful of that we have to give in at some point and realize this is okay. So if she ever hears that just from somebody who's been through this divorce thing and I swore off marriage and my mom set me down and says, well, why won't you give Beth a chance? I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm like, 4 times. I got kids already. I'm good. She goes, but you can't judge everybody based upon the women you've already dealt with or what's happened. So I just offered that advice. For you, did that do anything to you as far as not wanting to marry again or marry anybody from a different country?
Yes. I never lived with anyone nor remarried. That was like, I think, honestly, it's not that I haven't enjoyed some relationships, although it's been a long, long time, but it just wasn't an incentive. I will just put it that way. Like every time, and I've certainly dated wonderful, wonderful individuals, but I have said to myself in the back of my head, what will this do to my life? What is the potential of harm here? And it's hard to just let that go. And then at some point when my kids grew up and I'd been their sole supporter the entire time and things got easier, I also sort of thought, and this is not the nicest thing, but I said to myself, do I really want all the work of a relationship? I don't know. I could just get more cats. Just kidding.
Well, the other encouraging thing I'll say to you, if you ever listen to my episode, listen to Amanda Blackwood's. Amanda Blackwood was trafficked 3 times once when she was in her 30s. And the most shocking thing to me was after all of the trafficking that she went through, with all of the abuses she received in all of those different relationships. If you read her book, which is called Custom Justice, I was like, how can you ever trust a man ever again? But she's remarried and she's married now. And I asked her, I says, well, how does this work? And she's like, you know what? He sat down with me after he read her book. He knew everything before he even proposed. And, he was like, I need more of you in my life, and took her for everything that she was. And she says, because I knew that I could trust him. So listen to her episode. I think it'd be encouraging to you too as well. I'm not trying to force you to get married, but I'm just
but I'm going to ring you up if I decide to remarry, so I could be on the podcast again with an update.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. That would be great.
Thanks, David.
So why did you decide to write Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters?
Pieces of Me is, first, let me be honest. I love reading as a child, and I wanted to be a writer. I started with really bad poetry, and I got a journalism degree. So I love story. I love music. I love movies like nobody else. I just love story. But when this was unfolding so badly, and I was arrested in a foreign country, and I met people who'd never met me, who risked their lives for me, for me and my kids to be reunited, when strangers gave in the way that most people's families never would consider, there was some takeaways there, as well as the fact that domestic abuse and family violence happens so very frequently, but it flourishes in silence. As long as we keep family secrets and we keep the light off of it, it can grow like wildfire. And so I've absolutely vowed that was not going to be the case in my situation. And it ended up as a wonderful story in so many ways. And yes, there were system setbacks and corruption and all of the things. But I knew when I became a trauma-informed trainer at work. I worked in probation for 20 years. And when I started training to be a trauma-informed trainer, it was like a lightning bolt that hit me between the eyes of why I had been so unsuccessful parenting my teenage daughters, because I really parented them with an old school mindset of, you need to just get over this. You need to just be thankful for what we have. You need to put that in the past and all of that. And it really made things harder on them. It added to their scar tissue, which was not in short supply. So that was both the beginning and the end of my book. And I felt it had takeaways. People then kind of complained like, well, you didn't say how what kind of skills were needed to get through a really, really hard time like that. So I wrote the follow-up book, Grounded in Grit, Turn Your Challenges into Superpowers. And I just published that one in August. But that was more of a how-to guide for people coming out of huge trauma to be able to maybe autopsy the situation and get the things in place that we need to get on the other side. I don't think we ever put trauma behind us, but we incorporate it into our lives, and it can sometimes be a strength.
Now, you've done the one thing that a lot of authors want. I talked to a lot of them. I've read a lot of great books, which is your book actually gets turned into a movie. What was that process like, and what was the overall feeling when you got the call that says, we want to make this into a Lifetime show?
That was shocking. That was shocking because as an author, and I would, let's be perfectly honest, I was a nobody author, and there's tons of us. And most authors, even if you're traditionally published, which I was not, you sell 1,000 copies or less of your book, most less than 1,000 copies over the lifetime of the book. So my little independently published book had done well, but you're subject to a lot of scams. People call you, write you, email you, steal your work, all of that. It just happens pretty much all the time. So when I first got the email from a company I'd not heard from, I was on a trip out of country and thinking, oh boy, who is this? And assuming that it was spam. And it turned out, as I looked into it a little deeper, I was like, oh, this is a true production company in Canada. And, it starts with a production company before they find a home for it, which happened to be Lifetime. They always envisioned it that way. but it was crazy. It was crazy. It took a year just to get us to get to the point where we could option the contract. And it took a second option. It's less than a 3% chance of someone's book becoming a movie. Being optioned is very special. And most of the time when a book is optioned, it does not turn into a movie. It goes away. To be honest with you, I was like, well, it'd be great if it worked out, but I won't assume it will. Then the pandemic came and I thought, oh, that's the end of that. And I will be darned, those Canadians took the pandemic so seriously and all the protocols that went with it. And they went ahead and marched right through it and filmed the movie in Canada and in Greece without having any big problems. And they did a beautiful job. I didn't get to be on set. That was a huge disappointment, but they included me in the script writing part and making sure that I was comfortable with it and taking feedback. Fabulous group at Cineflix. I loved that process. I felt they chose a very talented and dynamic cast. And I was so pleased about the movie. And a lot of times, because I am a movie fanatic, I go to the theater usually once a week at least. So I thought, well, this could be awful. And a lot of times book to movies are, they did a great job. They did a wonderful job.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. So not only does your book get picked up, option, turn into a movie, now you get told that Sarah Drew is going to play you.
Yay!
For those of you guys who don't know her, she was Dr. April Kepner on Grey's Anatomy. She's been in Everwood. So she's not just a nobody. She's a very well-known actress. How did you feel to know that Sarah was going to play you? And here's the on-the-spot question. How do you feel that she did portraying you?
Oh my goodness. I was excited. I didn't watch Grey's Anatomy back in the day, although I've seen lots of things with her featured as the actress now, but I love her. I think she's amazing. She did not overdo or underdo. I am not the most emotional person. I didn't cry and blubber my way through the crisis. Typically, never, almost never. I won't say never, but almost never. I went to work the very next day that after my kids were kidnapped, showed up regular time, did not, you know what I mean? I am definitely someone very used to deep family traumas. So this was just more of the same. And she did a beautiful job in encapsulating that. And they also did a phenomenal job with the little girls who played my daughters. They were sisters. The supporting cast was great. The man who played my husband was a Greek national, very well-known actor there. Amazing job. He was terrifying. Some of the locations they chose were the same ones where this actually had happened. And watching it was crazy. I'm very proud of the work they did.
So I've watched many of Lifetime movies. I've never got to interview the lady or Betty Mahmoudi because I get to ask you this question now. Lifetime has always been accused of overdoing a show. You know, oh, they've added way too much for dramatic effect. Do you feel like they added too much to your movie for over dramatic effect, or what we see on that screen is as close to you can get to you actually going through it?
Oh, they did a great job. Now, when we met, first of all, and I can't credit Lifetime with that as much because it's a production company, Cineflix. But when we met, they asked what my fears would be adapting my book to a movie. And I told them, first thing, this is already a dramatic story. You know, here this happened to me as a kid. Then it happened as an adult, young mother. Then, you know, I was arrested and all of these things happened. We don't need to make it more dramatic because it's already very dramatic. And so, you know, there's something called tragedy porn, and I don't want to be a part of it. I definitely don't want to be a part of that. I also don't want to be looked at as an angel, have people look up to me unnecessarily. No one should be ever put on a pedestal. I had an army of support, and I don't know how to get other people's kids out of foreign countries. So there's that, you know. They did a great job. I feel like Sarah Drew was the right choice, and it was just so. Of course, they omitted a lot of things because you have 90 minutes because they add in commercials. Even if it was at the big screen, they would have to omit a lot of the things. So there were big parts. You don't see me in Turkey, the country of Turkey. You don't see certain things. There are characters that had to be combined, but it was just delightful.
And I think now that that's going to start to change in the industry after Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was a 3-hour movie. And I think from what I read, one of the biggest concerns were, one, they wanted and needed to tell the whole entire story of Oppenheimer. But two,
Right.
is anybody going to really sit there for 3 hours? The last 3-hour movie that I think that I can come with that I actually watched was probably Malcolm X years ago. And that had me enthralled, being African-American, what happened to Malcolm X.
Right.
But Oppenheimer has done amazing. They've drawn all this money, and they're saying that now they're starting to think that maybe long-form documentaries like that is going to become a thing if it's interesting enough. So hopefully, if that ever does come to a thing, I hope that Cineplex is the name of the company?
Cineflix.
So I hope that Cineflix goes back, relook at your story, and add in all the stuff that we don't see. Because I think when I can read a book and then I see a movie on that and it's as close as it can be, I even feel even more connected. And then the movie, right, if it's done right, who's never heard of your book can go, oh, maybe I want to go read the book now. I've done that several times. So everything can be hinged together.
You know, I feel as a movie buff, I have 90 minutes to maximum 90 minutes to maybe 120, and that's it. And so I went to Oppenheimer, it's a great film. Don't get me wrong. But I fell fast asleep. And now the idea that I need to go back there and pay the money and watch all the rest, it's just annoying, but it is better on big screen than not. It's a flawless movie. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is no complaint. I just don't have the attention span of it. And today with people trained on their social media, they're looking at TikTok, they're looking at Instagram, they're sliding their fingers to look at the news. They're not watching long form news. It is a little bit safer still to go with less can be more. Even when you're writing a book, and let's say you weren't going to put it into a paperback, you were just going to do a Kindle and maybe an audiobook, time matters. Time does matter. And so you at least want to capture someone's attention like right away. And I think they really did it. And so I'm very honored for that. But that was a long movie, Oppenheimer. It was long, but good. Long, but good. And it did help me get a little rest, which I needed.
I did YouTube for 13 years before I did this. And that was one thing I always told them. Everybody's like, oh, well, man, can you help me do a YouTube channel? I said, this is the one thing I'm going to tell you. You have 5 seconds to capture that person's interest before they watch your video. If you miss that window, you're done. Because I was asked, well, how come do you always, I shot an opener, like today we're going to talk about the X-Bar guitar and this is what it does, stick around. Well, because now in that 5 seconds, I got to watch the video to find out what he's talking about because it piques my interest. It's kind of the same with podcasting too. If we can't get your interest into what we're going to talk about, and this is even harder, I think, because a lot of people read before they listen. So your show notes has to be on point and get to the details of what you're going to talk about. So I agree with you there. Maybe less is more. Everybody can't do 3-hour movies. I don't think I can now with the work schedule I have. I'll probably fall asleep too. So I'm with you on that one. So I know that this happened to you also as a child. If you could share a little bit about, who your kidnapper was, if you knew who that was, and how do you think now that kind of affected you? Because now you kind of feel like this is a generational thing, which I'm sure adds to the reason why your daughters probably doesn't even want to have children at this point because of that fear as well, right? So
I'm lucky they have cats. So when I was a child, I grew up in Alaska, but I had known early on that I was born in Kentucky. It's a long ways away. And I remember as a very little bitty child feeling like, I don't feel like this is where I belong. This is not my home. And later learning from my mother, the story kept evolving, but that she had taken some of her children and left Kentucky and left the children's respective fathers in the dust and came to Alaska, where then she tried to kind of make the newer love interest of hers into my father. And so eventually I went through an illegal adoption with him to change my name so I wasn't traceable. And so this is how it began. What later on I learned, I looked my father up through an attorney when I was 20, and found out what actually happened and the efforts he had made to try to find me, and met a whole bunch of siblings and relatives I didn't even know I had. There's a problem with parental abductions, even when sometimes, and I will say, I know that sometimes people are taking children out of very unsafe situations, and I do understand this, but there is a problem when kids are raised in secrecy. And when you have an abduction, it creates a feeling of, one of the most harmful things someone can say to a child is, well, at least it was your parent. At least it was someone you knew. Like, wait a minute. The people you're supposed to rely on that are supposed to keep you safe and care about you having a decent life, that's the person you're saying it's okay that they did this. And that happened to my daughters a lot. And people will still say that. They mean to be helpful. They're not trying to be rude. But the message comes, well, at least it was just a parent. Well, I have to tell you, I grew up in really scary circumstances with a still alive, but very, very, very abusive parent who then started getting rid of the kids. So she not only severed their relationships with their fathers, but then started doing everything she could to get rid of us very early on. And so it wasn't a great, safe thing. And it's interesting you say this, because I just talked to the producer a couple of weeks ago. We and I had a Zoom call from Stolen by Their Father. And he said, what really hooked us on your story? It wasn't just that your kids were kidnapped. It was that you were too. He said, kidnapped children's stories are, honestly, very, very common. It's sad, but true. But to have a double. So I told him jokingly, I'm like, wow, I should thank my mother. I think I won't, but maybe I'll miss that one. But thanks, Mom. But yes, it is. You just think a lot of times people in different circumstances in mind, a lot of us want to do differently than what we grew up with. But if we don't give ourselves time and the resources to learn how, that doesn't happen naturally.
Now you go on, you work in probation, I believe it was. You become a child abuse investigator. Now you're working for the exact same system that failed you. How did you come to that conclusion to want to work in that area?
Well, I first started out with a domestic abuse advocacy. So I loved working for many, many years with domestic abuse survivors and helping advocate when they felt they couldn't advocate for themselves, and helping to teach skills so that people could learn to be their own best advocate. But it's hard to clean up messes after they've already happened. And, domestic abuse has a long-reaching impact. So eventually I went to work in child abuse investigation and then probation work, starting with adult sex offenders when I was in graduate school, but then moving to juvenile offenders, really wanting to make a difference and help stop the violence. And what I learned was so, so helpful. I think I would have personalized so many of the failings that happened in my own case had I not worked in government work and in non-government work. But when you realize how many more people need help than there are resources to help them, and you see how easy it is to make mistakes or to make a promise that frankly doesn't happen, to get to know the heart of people who come to the work with good, often very good intentions, and then watch the secondary trauma and the burnout, it was very healing for me. In a weird way, it was. It enabled me to make a difference with using my own experiences and education, but it also helped me not personalize what hadn't gone that well. And, to realize you can do what you can do, and then you have to start letting that go. And I feel like I would have been a different person entirely had I not went to work trying to serve people who've gone through many times a lot of trauma.
Do you recommend that all trauma survivors write a book, or at least write down what they're feeling?
You know what? Writing is not in and of itself therapeutic to everyone if they haven't done some other work. So in other words, if something horrible happened years ago, I meet a lot of people today. I work in true crime myself, my day job, as a survivor interviewer. But if I'm talking to someone who never unpacked their experience, didn't talk to a therapist, didn't talk to a friend, didn't talk to other people, peer support groups, I would never recommend that they start writing it all out, because that's a lot of stuff that's been not processed. They need more support before they do it. But for a lot of us, if we already have some supports in place, journaling can be a therapeutic way to start. It is absolutely proven that writing about what we have been holding on to is so beneficial. And I'm not saying everyone wants to write a published book. That's a whole different beast. But start with journaling and see. And if someone, if the person feels called to do it and there's a reason they believe that their writing would benefit readers, I absolutely think do it, And what separates me as an author from other people is nothing more than persistence. It's nothing more than the ability to write something out, to get feedback that that's not exactly what it needed to be, to take classes, critique groups, whatever they need to do to get better, but don't give up. And, keep letting your skin get thickened over time. And I truly believe that can be a huge part of healing.
Out of all the things that you've been through, being kidnapped yourself, having your daughters kidnapped, having to get them back, if a genie came down tomorrow and said, Lizbeth, I give you this wish, you can rewrite your whole life, start it over, and turn out the way you want it to be, would you trade the life you live now for a brand new life, and why not?
That is a great question. And I would say my life that I live today is hard earned. It's hard won. And so I wouldn't necessarily trade it, but I would not intentionally do something that would create lifelong scars for my children. And so I have to say, as wonderful has been to work in this field and to help people and to write and speak and all the things, if I could go back and be more cognizant of how I moved forward and realize that trauma doesn't go away on its own, that it needs work and tending to, I would do the heavy lifting before I had the privilege of being a mom, because they deserved a really amazing, safe childhood. And once they started idling at a high level of stress due to feeling unsafe as little children, it's hard to undo those experiences.
I asked you that question because I was asked the same question and I thought about it. And this is what I said. I said, I probably would not redo anything. And here's why. What we go through in life makes us who we are. And now, if I had the option, I said, yeah, I probably wouldn't have been married so many times. If I could have all the same kids I have now, I would have them with the wife I currently am married to, and we'd have all these kids together. But I'm also a Christian, and I believe that the cards that we're dealt, sometimes we're not supposed to change them. And it's kind of like I told Amanda, I said, maybe it's because God knew that we were the ones that were going to be able to handle this, get through it, and then live to tell that story to help somebody else who's weaker than what we are. And as much as the trauma you've been through, and like me, and with all the abuse and the scars and things of that nature, I said no, because I don't think I would be the person that I am now. I do feel like in some situations, in some relationships I've been in, if I've never seen my mom get hit, I probably would have hit the woman I was with, because of the way that I was forced into situations. So I just think sometimes that, yeah, as hard as it is, we're dealt the cards that we dealt, we come out of it and we become better people for it, even though there are long life scars, long life health issues. But we're the only ones that can say we've come through it, and now let me help you. And then it always feels good to me, and I'm sure to you too, when I know that I've helped somebody avoid something I've already been through.
That is a great feeling. And the other thing is, it reminds me that healing is a choice. And if there's something I'm proud of, it's that I recognize that we can go through things that may or may not be our fault in life, whatever it is, but we choose how we respond to it. And so even recently, I covered, one of the cases I covered was a mass shooting, which is always so sad to talk to family members who lost someone who maybe just went to the movies that day. and, you said goodbye, and then you didn't know that was the last time you would see them. How people responded to that over many years is so very individual, but a great reminder that while sometimes things happen that we cannot control, we always are in charge of our response later and our healing. And we can stay and claim victimhood and wear it like a badge for the rest of our lives, if that's what we want to do, and be upset and feel powerless and be angry and all of that. Or we can make other choices. And it's a lot harder to make those other choices. And I think things get worse before they get better. If you're going to pursue healing, you lean into some heavy pain, but we can do it. Not alone, but we can do it.
Can we still find Stolen by Their Fathers right now on Lifetime?
Yes. So my book Pieces of Me is wherever books are sold, and it's on audiobook as well. And the movie Stolen by Their Father is on Lifetime. It's streamable. If you just Google, how can I stream it? You'll find it. But it's streamable on Hulu, on Vudu, and on some other popular streaming services. So it's not just on Lifetime. It's on some other places. And I'd encourage people to enjoy watching it.
What do you want the audience to take away from our conversation today?
Oh my, well, it was sure fun to sit down with a friend and have a chat, but I definitely want people to understand there is always hope as long as we understand we can't do everything ourselves alone. I don't think secrecy and shame are helpful things. And I don't think being stubborn and trying to tamp down hard situations, saying I will suppress the memory, or I just don't want to think about it or rehash it. But I feel like healing is available to all of us if we're ready to do so. And community.
Well, Lizbeth, it was an honor and a pleasure meeting you today. Definitely one of my most enlightened guests. The story you have is incredible. I encourage everybody to go get the book, which we're going to tell them where to go get that again here in a second, and watch the movie. You are a very strong woman. Nobody can see you yet, but they will. You look great, and don't look like you've been through anything. You look fabulous.
So. Lots of makeup. It was so great meeting you.
Yeah, great meeting you as well. Anytime you want to come back on the show, let me know. And you always have a welcome and open invitation.
I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. All right. Have a good day.
Appreciate you as well. All right, guys, that was the incredible Lizbeth Meredith. Of course, you can get your copy of Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters at Amazon. It is also on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have that, you can read that for free under your subscription. So you have no excuse not to read it. And I'll remind you again, Lizbeth does not get credit or money for that unless you are reading the book and turning the pages. So downloading it alone does not help. You can also find the book on audiobook as well as any other place great books are sold. Also, go check out the movie from the book, Stolen by Their Father, as mentioned on Hulu, Vudu, Lifetime, and many other places. I will leave you a few resources below of where you can find that. All right, guys. So again, thank you for tuning in. I know you have many options in true crime and interview podcasts. I am grateful that you have chose me for the last year and a half. So I hope you're being good to yourself and each other. And always remember to always stay humble. An act of kindness can make someone's day. A little love and compassion go a long way. And remember that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. One link to the link tree has it all. Feel free to drop us a line at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Arslan. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild and David McClam. Theme music, Legendary by New Alchemist. Introduction and ending credits by Jackie Voice. See you next time on True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.